Hello, and welcome to the Rough Edges podcast with Sarah I. Fox. In this podcast, I will guide you through my faith and mental health journey to dispel the stigma surrounding mental illness and to create an empowering resource for those who wish to discover more about these topics. I pray that this podcast will not only bless you, but that it will bring growth and healing to our communities. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Rough Edges. Today, I am so excited to introduce my guest, Jesse Mercury. Jesse Mercury is the host of the Major Pain podcast, which is an ongoing project highlighting the experiences of our chronically ill and disabled community. Through the resulting conversations, Major Pain spreads knowledge, awareness, empathy, and community, proving time and again that we are not alone. Welcome, Jesse.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm so excited to be here. So excited to get to talk to you again. And thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Yes, absolutely. And just to mention, yes, I was on the Major Pain podcast. And it
Yes.
was so awesome to get to connect with you. And now it's an honor to have you on my podcast as well.
Yes, thank you so much. Your episode of Major Pain is so fantastic. I really appreciated everything you shared about your journey. It's so interesting for me to get interviewed for a change. So here we go.
Yes. So before we dive in to our topic for today, what are three things that keep you motivated on a daily basis and why?
Wow. This is such an interesting question. Definitely a big one is my partner, my wife, Andy. She has been with me through a lot of my chronic illness journey. And actually, when things got to be their worst, she was there and stayed with me and helped me and supported me. And that just meant so much to me. And now that I'm at a better place in my journey and we just got married, just knowing that I have the support of someone like that in my life is really, really powerful. This question, this is actually I think the hardest question that you sent for me for some reason. Like, what keeps me motivated? You know, I think a big part of it right now in my life, I am motivated by the fact that I lost so many years to chronic illness. I spent most of my 30s in bed, sick, and that haunts me. We're going to talk a lot about this today, I'm sure, but a big part of my journey was learning acceptance to being sick in bed all the time and learning to find a way to be productive and to feel like I had value and to be useful inside of that. And then I got a diagnosis and got a lot of my health back. And then all of a sudden I can do all these things that I couldn't do before. And now I feel like I have to play catch up. And that whole sense of acceptance has been overridden by this sense of like I am behind in life. So I'm definitely in this place in life where I'm sort of feeling like I want to do everything and attack everything every day and get as much done as possible because I lost so much time. And the third thing that motivates me is that I am a huge nerd. I'm a very creative person. I just love to make things. And I was telling my wife Andy the other day, it's like I haven't recorded a song in a while, and it makes me feel bad. I want to record a song so I feel better. Just that the act of creation is something that I really crave. So, working on Major Pain, just making a podcast and finishing an episode is such a satisfying experience. And of course, I'm so motivated. Here's a fourth thing. I'm so motivated by the community, the chronic illness and disability community, just to be able to create something that gives people a chance to tell their own stories and share their voice and share their experience. I know what it's like to be sick and not be able to share that with anyone. So to create a platform for that, I mean, that's like the foundational motivation behind Major Pain itself. So yeah, there you go. Four answers. It was so hard, and now here I am. I'm overachieving with four answers.
No, that was excellent. I'm like, wow, that was hard. It didn't seem hard, but But yeah, I definitely resonate a lot with especially your community and how you said your wife supported you, especially during like your experience with chronic illness. And I also love that creativity is like a huge component of motivating you to do what you need to do on a daily basis, because it definitely is just an empowering feeling to know that you are connecting with other people through your podcast and also other ways of creating as well. So, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So I do want to, you mentioned part of it already, but I do want to talk about your experience with chronic illness. Can you share about your journey with managing chronic illness, like how you got diagnosed and just like your initial reactions and everything in between?
Yeah, I'll try to tell the briefest version possible of a 40-year long journey. Okay, so my chronic illness journey is really sort of built off of mystery. We just did not know what was wrong with me, or even if something was wrong with me for most of my life. I will spoil it and say that I got diagnosed at 38 years old. I'm now 40. So starting in second grade, I started to have some weird issues. Second grade, high school, college, I was having weird issues around mold exposure where we just thought that I was just really allergic to mold. But I would sometimes, walk into a moldy room and collapse and start twitching. And it was just weird. It didn't make sense. And then right after college, I got really, really sick and we could not figure out why. And I left work. I was sick on the couch for about a year. This is when I was around 24 years old, 23, 24. And it was just a huge mystery and we couldn't figure it out. We went to doctor after doctor. I was tested for everything under the sun and nothing came back positive. And then the doctors start to question my mental health. So many doctors have looked at me and said, I think this kid's making it up. Like I went to the emergency room when it first started because I was just like, I was fine. And then all of a sudden, like my hand is tingling and, I feel weird. I don't feel like I'm fully myself or fully awake. Like something's going on. And I go to the emergency room and they thought that I was drug seeking. And actually, I had a friend working at the emergency room. If he hadn't been there, I wouldn't have been seen at all. But they did the tests and they couldn't find anything wrong with me, send me home. And, that was the beginning of a long process of trying to figure out what was going on. And we never really figured it out. The best that we could figure at the time was we did discover there was mold in my house. So we figure, oh, it's mold again. I've been reacting to mold since second grade. I need to get out of my house. And that's when I moved from San Diego to Seattle. Had some really great years in Seattle, made a bunch of friends. I just really love it up here. I'm still in Seattle now. I just had to sort of be careful with my health because it was sort of fragile and we didn't know why. But then a few years into that, my health just collapsed. And this was when I was about early 30s. And it was sort of like a slow decline into a chasm, like an open pit of despair, of just like, my body doesn't work anymore. I could barely walk. I could barely think. I was having muscle spasms, twitching all the time, full body pain, all sorts of weird issues that were just completely unexplained. And I couldn't go back to work, went on short-term leave and started going through the diagnostic process again. And I've already been through this before and didn't find anything. So it's like, we got to go back to the drawing board and try again. The only thing we know is that I seem to react to mold. But at this point, in my early 30s, there's no mold exposure. I've learned to avoid it like the plague. So we just had no leads. And I started from scratch, couldn't find anything, lost my short-term disability, got misdiagnosed with Lyme disease, and just went down this whole rabbit hole where I was treated for Lyme disease for a year. It didn't do anything because I didn't have Lyme disease, and just went to doctor after doctor, went to a naturopath. At this point, I had met Andy and my family and my girlfriend, Andy, at the time. Now we're married, but at the time she was my girlfriend. Everyone's like helping me. My family and my partner, they're helping me try to pursue this thing and pay all these huge bills. And we just couldn't figure it out. And I just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And it got to the point where I really couldn't walk very far anymore. So I ended up getting a wheelchair. I got a cane first and then graduated to a wheelchair and spent about 2 years as an ambulatory wheelchair user, which means that you can walk, but not very far. You can stand, you can walk a very short distance, but you really can't go out and about without a wheelchair. And that was just life changing, in a very positive way. And this is when my story sort of starts to turn, which is that I started to realize that a lot of the preconceptions I had about health and wellness and life and my future were all totally wrong. And I had this huge block. I didn't want to need a wheelchair. And then I got one. It's like, oh, wow, I love this. I'm outside, I'm moving around under my own power. I have my freedom back, and I'm suddenly more productive because I'm not forcing myself to do something that's really detrimental to my health, which is walking or just like a physical activity in general. So, and then that's such a tricky thing too, because you need some physical activity. There's a huge difference between a little bit and none, right? And I tried as hard as I could to stay in that little bit territory. It would flare me up and I'd get really sick. So, yeah, it was just like a big mess. But then getting some mobility back with the wheelchair was sort of the beginning of a turning point for me where it's like, wow, I can actually be happy this way. And I had this amazing partner and we really went through it. It really seemed like we were going to break up for a minute there. It seemed like I might need to move to my parents and like get full-time care. I hadn't worked for years at this point, and finances for me were tough. And I'm just so grateful to my partner for helping to support me. But it's just like, this can't go on forever. But then getting the wheelchair, it's like things started to feel good again, a little bit of positivity. And I started to get that sense of acceptance like, wow, I could be happy. This might be the rest of my life. I don't know if I'm going to die tomorrow. We have absolutely no idea what's wrong with me. But I am seeing, at least improvement in my mental state from doing what my body needs and accepting what my body needs, no longer fighting against my body. And it was just this incredible lesson. And then right after that, we had a breakthrough where we discovered that I have something called mast cell activation syndrome, which is a dysfunction of the white blood cells that deal with allergens. So the mold thing was actually related the whole time. And we sort of discovered this backwards. I had a couple of tests that sort of led us in this direction. One was I got this new doctor who was really interested in mystery cases. And this isn't something I knew even was a thing. I was like, everyone's telling me, you need Dr. House, you need Dr. House, like the TV show. Turns out there's no such thing. Dr. House is a diagnostician, not a real thing. The closest we have is like the Mayo Clinic, where you go to see a whole group of doctors that all sort of treat you at once. They rejected me. I tried to go there and they wouldn't see me because I wasn't actively dying. So they're just like, no. But I did find that at my primary care's office, there was a doctor who was really interested in mystery cases. And I got in with her and she ran 80 tests, took 14 vials of blood before my first appointment. And one of the things that she found was that my Northwest allergen panel was like way off the charts. Like because I live in the Pacific Northwest, so something like the grass that's up here, you know, way off the charts. And that didn't make any sense because I wasn't really having like allergic symptoms. I was having muscle spasms and cognitive issues and like episodes that looked like seizures but weren't because I had the EEG. I had that one while having one of those episodes and there was no seizure activity in my brain. So it wasn't an actual seizure. That doctor also got me in for a full dysautonomia panel, including a tilt table test, because I was having these massive dizzy spells. They thought I might have postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which I did not have, but I did show signs of abnormal sweating response. They run chemicals over your skin in a little cuff and then measure how long it takes for you to sweat. And on one arm versus the other, my sweat response was like 10 minutes later. And that is weird. And that's a sign of something called small fiber neuropathy, which is a form of dysautonomia in which the small nerve fibers are damaged and it can cause all sorts of things to go wrong, including issues with walking.
Hello again. Before you dive into the rest of today's episode, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your support and for hitting that play button. If you want to expand on that support, here are 3 ways that you can do so. 1. Leave a review. If anything in today's episode resonated with you, or you would want to share about how the podcast changed your life, you can do so by leaving a review on Apple Podcast or Podchaser. 2. Check out our shop. The Rough Edges shop is a faith-based, women of color owned online shop where you can get a variety of products from tote bags, journals, t-shirts, and more. 20% of the proceeds go to a mental health organization. So check it out at roughedgespodcast.com/shop. 3. Connect on social media. Rough Edges is on a wide variety of social media platforms, including Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and more. If you want to connect outside of listening to the podcast episodes, you can do so on these platforms. If you have any questions, you can check out the episode description or stay to the end for more information. Now, enjoy your episode.
So that was like the first kind of pieces of evidence that we finally found. And I'm talking like decades into the journey at this point. So to find anything even slightly off was a big deal. So putting these things together, my doctor sent me to an allergist, and she's like, the neurological plus the allergic, I don't know what that means. The only thing I can think of is like maybe something mast cell related. So she sent me to this allergist who specializes in that. And he told me right away, he's like, yeah, this could be mast cell activation syndrome, which is a rare disease. Although it might be way less rare than we think because it's just sort of underreported in the medical establishment. So basically, your white blood cells that deal with allergens release chemicals into your bloodstream to help you fight off allergens. And with MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome, it's mast, like the mast of a ship, not MASS. People always think I'm saying mast cell. Mast cell. With MCAS, basically your mast cells are malfunctioning and releasing chemicals in your bloodstream all the time, which can eventually cause nerve damage, like small fiber neuropathy. This is actually still kind of hypothetical as far as like research hasn't officially said, hey, this is a thing that can happen, but this is what we think is happening with me, is that I had so many years of these chemicals flooding my body that it caused nerve damage that caused small fiber neuropathy. And we think that's sort of a weird overlap of these two things that was leading to a very strange presentation with the muscle spasms, the inability to walk, things that aren't necessarily common with either of these diseases, but can, MCAS with all these chemicals, it can cause neurological symptoms, but it's more on the rare side. So it's a rare presentation of a rare disease. And we did all the testing for MCAS and it came back negative. But then my doctor said the testing for this disease is actually really inconsistent. So I want to put you on the medication for this disease and see what happens. And within 3 months, I was out of the wheelchair. Within 3 months, I was walking. It was pretty wild. It was pretty fast. And it was a pretty extreme response. And we tested for the disease multiple times, never got proof positive of the disease, but he continued to, adjust my treatment regimen as if I had it. And I got better and better and better. A big piece of it was going on a low histamine diet because histamine is one of the chemicals that your body releases to deal with allergens. So it's like one of the main chemicals that mast cells release that we know of. There's actually over 1,000 chemicals, and we only know a little bit about a few of them. Histamine is the one we know the most about. So anyway, I was eating like an ultra high histamine diet at the recommendation of one of my old naturopaths who was saying, "Oh, you're sick. You need to work on your gut biome. You need to eat kimchi and sauerkraut every day." Turns out that fermented foods are the highest histamine foods on the planet. So I was poisoning myself for breakfast every day and flaring myself up every day based off of the food that I was eating because I was having some like either sauerkraut or kimchi with breakfast pretty much every day and like drinking tea that was high histamine and coffee and like all sorts of things. So I was really on the exact wrong type of diet for someone like me, even though it was super healthy. Like I was eating a very traditionally healthy diet, but it's just not what my body needed. So getting on that low histamine diet, getting an enzyme to break down histamine into my daily routine, getting on a whole treatment regimen with H1, H2 antihistamines, cromolyn sodium, which is that main medication that got me out of the wheelchair in 3 months, and just living this new lifestyle of extreme discipline around MCAS. And it just worked. It worked so well. In the midst of that, I had a hearing for disability and won my disability case and got back pay for years of having not worked. My health skyrockets. I'm able to go back to work. I'm now in the process of getting off disability. I'm able to get married, go on a honeymoon, and my life just completely turned around. My health has been pretty stable. I'm still improving. And I still have bad flare up days. If I do too much physical activity, that's a big trigger. If I'm ever exposed to mold, it's over. Then I'm sick for days. If I run out of medication, if I miss a dose of something, I'm flaring up, all the time from these little things, but the flare ups are getting better and better and taking less time to recover from. And I'm now in this place that I never thought I'd be, where I mean, you could meet me now and it's like that's a totally healthy dude. That's a normal dude who works a normal job who's healthy, which is absolutely bizarre because a couple years ago I was the guy who was like dealing with the way that people treat you when you're in public in a wheelchair and all of the weird societal interactions that I had to deal with that were shocking to me. And now I'm like living this bizarrely healthy lifestyle for someone with a chronic illness. So yeah, it's been a very strange journey.
Wow, that is just so empowering to know because it's like a diagnosis really does make a huge difference. And people often like underestimate the importance of getting diagnosed properly because the fact that you were able to go through that entire experience that for decades, just not knowing what's going on and just the process, I could just imagine like how grueling that must have been, how frustrating that must have been. No, honestly, because it's like if you don't know, you don't know how to treat your body.
Right.
You don't know how to treat the symptoms. You don't even know what symptoms to look for because you don't really know. So I just want to know, like, how during those overwhelming moments, I could have just imagined, like, just the confusion and frustration. Like, how did you deal with those moments as they came? And, like, what was just like the driving force behind, like, you having that hope despite all of these issues?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I went through eras, different eras where the answer was totally different. At first, it was self-belief, and that eroded and eventually vanished. But at first, at first, the first time a doctor questioned my sanity, and I remember the guy, I went to this mold specialist in San Diego back where I grew up. And it was towards the end of my time in San Diego, towards the end of that first diagnostic process when we hadn't found anything. We found the mold in the house and was like, oh, this might be it. We go to see the doctor. Was like, I've been so sick. Could mold be doing this? And he's like, no. But you know what could be doing it is you think that mold can do it to you, so you're doing it to yourself, basically. And I was so upset. Like here I am, 23 years old at the time, completely sick. Like my life has come to a complete halt, and this guy's telling me it's my fault. And I knew he was wrong, I knew it. I knew it to the core of my being. Like, this man is wrong. And it's like, okay, well, we can ignore that doctor because he's wrong. And I know, I believe I'm going to find it. Cut to like a decade later when I'm doing this whole process again, and I've had like a dozen doctors tell me that it's my fault and that I'm doing it to myself and that I'm crazy and that this is a mental health problem. Going through cycles and cycles of that, like I'd go through a whole diagnostic process, they wouldn't find anything. They'd send me for a psychological evaluation. They'd tell me to go back to the doctor. They'd say, you need to see a doctor. This is not psychological. And then the same thing would happen again. And after that happening a couple of times, I would run out of doctors and I would end up at the psychologist and there was nowhere else to go. And I gave up. I quit the doctor. I stopped going to doctors. That's when I started looking into a naturopath. And that was like a very expensive and ultimately very harmful path for me. There's amazing naturopaths out there, and I'm a fan of naturopaths. I'm not against them at all, but you just have to be so careful. You have to be so careful who you go to. This guy I was going to was like, I can heal you. I'm the only one who can. And I was with him for over a year, and I just got worse and worse and worse.
Mm.
And I started to question myself throughout this whole process. Like the thing that was driving me, this self-belief, like really eroded to the point where I no longer really knew if I was doing it to myself or not. And that like opens up this whole can of worms internally and just like questioning the core of my own belief structure about myself. And I mean, this is still something that I'm recovering from.
Mhm.
Getting a diagnosis, I cannot understate how important it is for someone like me who is undiagnosed with all of these mystery things going on and all these doctors questioning you. I cannot understate how important it is. But getting the diagnosis was the point where I was finally able to start, you know, believing myself again. And I didn't get, the hard diagnosis. I got a clinical diagnosis. We couldn't capture it. The testing for MCAS is really inconsistent and is not great right now. So hopefully someday it will be. The real test is what is the medication doing to you? And that was just so clear and so consistent that my doctor gave me a diagnosis, a clinical diagnosis, which clinical diagnosis is super legit. I mean, that's the only diagnosis there is for maybe even like a majority of illnesses. I host the Major Pain podcast. I don't know. A lot of illnesses, but still I wanted that sheet of paper with that positive result that said, yes, you have this thing. And I never did get that. I did get that for small fiber neuropathy, which was awesome. And I screamed and jumped around and ran around like for joy because I was already treated for MCAS at that point. So I could jump and scream and run. But yeah, so at a certain point, I really lost faith in myself. And I got so lucky that I met Andy at the part of the journey where I started to lose faith in myself because then someone else had faith in me and I had something to fight for, which is this future that I want with this person. I met my person and I knew that it was my person. And I knew that if my health didn't improve, I might lose my person. And it's not because my person's going to dump me for being sick, which that's happened to me many times. It's a thing that happens. And like no fault to them either. Like me being sick, it was very intense. And I get it. Like, why would you want to date someone who's that sick? I saw it from their side as well. But then you find your person and they love you anyway. And it's just like the most powerful, wonderful thing. And I always believed of myself that if the person that I really loved was sick, I would still love them and still want to be with them. I've always believed that of myself. And that's why it was so frustrating when people would dump me for being sick. But I'd be like, okay, that's not my person. They're
Mhm.
not willing to love me unconditionally. And that's what I eventually need to find. And then I find it. And it's like, even that could, like, if I can't be present and be a part of, my own life, let alone my partner's life, I have to do it. I have to figure it out. So that became a real driving force at a certain point in the journey. And I actually started the Major Pain podcast within the last 2 years of my diagnostic process. I think I got diagnosed towards the end of the second year of the show. We just entered the fifth year of the show. So it's been going for a little while. But I think we'd done like 2 years of the show when I finally got onto this right track. And I learned so much about chronic illness and disability from the people that would come on the podcast. The first time I ever heard the words mast cell activation syndrome was from a guest of Major Pain. I'd never heard those words. It was Morgan in season one, an episode called the Ehlers-Danlos Triad, POTS, MCAS, and EDS, something like that. Morgan was telling me about mast cell activation syndrome, just talking about allergens and exposure and triggers and having weird things happen to your body. The light bulb went off in my head. It's like, that's something to look into. So
Yeah,
that when it came up in my journey later on, I knew what it was. And I knew, yes, I want to look at this. I've wanted to look at this for years, and I couldn't find a doctor who even knew what it was.
right.
So, you know, I learned so much about self-advocacy. And I think that this is like a huge piece of the puzzle. When a doctor tells you no, it's okay to say why. And it's okay to say, well, but what about this? I understand. You can say, I understand. Thank you for your opinion. Here's something else that I'd like you to consider. And maybe we can reconsider that no. And learning how to do that and not just take a doctor's word as gospel was
Mhm.
critical. Towards the end of my diagnostic journey, a couple of things that I just got really lucky, finding this partner and like finding this community through the podcast. It transitioned from an internal drive to more of an external push that I really needed because I had sort of given up. I started over at a new medical center, University of Washington Medical Center. My first appointment there was with my new primary care provider who believed every word I said and said, I have no idea what's wrong with you, but I will keep sending you to appointments with specialists until we figure it out. And
Mm.
he was not lying, he was telling me the truth. And he retired recently, which is a bummer for me, but great for him. But I mean, he became a push for me. And to have a PCP in your corner is massive. So I'm just like full of gratitude because when I got to the point where I was really kind of giving up, I found this external strength to keep going. So yeah, it really transitioned into that, and I'm just so grateful for it.
Wow, yes, absolutely. Like community is such an integral part of managing whether it's chronic illness or mental illness. Like just having that support system can make a huge difference. And I love that you said that internal like motivation turned into an external drive because you had the right people who were in your corner that created that safety net and support system for you to be able to move forward. And I just love that.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly it. It's weird to be me and to be grateful, right? Like I was sick for all my 30s. I look back at it now and I feel grateful. It's weird. And I learned so much from the journey and it really changed me as a person. And I learned how to be a grateful person, which I think that I used to be a sort of dissatisfied, always wanting more, wanting to like fortune and glory, Indiana Jones style person. I was not an adventurer. I've always been a very weirdo, creative type guy. And then I had this transition in the wheelchair to be like, wow, a beautiful day is something to be grateful for. Going outside on a beautiful day is enough. Having someone that loves you is enough. And finding this person that loves me who is my dream person is such a stroke of luck. So, yes, my health is not great, but this thing worked out real well. So, that's something to be grateful for. And it really changed my whole life perspective into one of gratitude. And then I got the diagnosis. And that's something that's like I'm still wrapping my head around. Like things have gone very well for me in the last couple of years. And after a long, long time of things not going well, it's scary and it's overwhelming. And I'm really trying to apply my gratitude practice to my state of life right now, which is one that I am deeply grateful for.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but it's almost more challenging now to be grateful because of the fear of loss, which,
Yeah.
yeah, it's complicated.
No, for sure. And like I definitely resonate with you when you say like the gratitude came through those hard experiences. Cause like when I got diagnosed with bipolar disorder, like I didn't understand just the gravity of being grateful for the little moments, like things that we take for granted every single day. It's like, man, I went through the day. I didn't have like, an episode. Like I was able to move throughout the day and do what I needed to do. Like that is just something that we take for granted every day. And just the fact that you were able to find that gratitude even in the most challenging aspects and points of your life, like that is just something that's inspiring.
It sounds like you went through a similar journey with your diagnosis. And this is the thing that I think is so interesting is that talking to people on major pain, I feel like the chronic illness and disability community gets it and feels the gratitude.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that makes us special. I've just heard it over and over from people on the podcast, people living with really, really difficult diagnoses. And I asked them, would you change this? Would you get rid of it if you could? And the answer is always no. It's always like, no, this has taught me so much. And it's made me a more grateful person and a happier person because of it. And I really think that long-term happiness is a result of gratitude.
Mhm.
So I think that there's a weird thing here where living through these types of challenges can make you a happier person. If you haven't been challenged in this way, it's really hard to know what to be grateful for and
Yeah.
how to be happy and how to be satisfied with anything.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Rough Edges podcast with Sarah I. Fox. If you want more updates on the podcast, you can follow on Instagram at rough.edges.podcast, or you can visit the official podcast website at roughedgespodcast.com. Thanks again for listening and have a wonderful day.